Hi there, thank you for tuning in to this presentation of Practical Strategies for Copyright Compliance at the University of Regina. Today we're going to encourage you to use some tools and resources available to you at the University of Regina as well as on the web that will help to ensure that you are copyright compliant. This means that you need to think before you do some things that are typically done on campus, using course packs, posting material online, whether that material is in UR courses or in other online venues, before you give handouts in class and before you display material in class. We've run into a few myths as we've been doing these copyright presentations across campus. Often people ask us the question, does a work have to have a copyright logo on it in order to be protected by copyright law? And the answer to that question is no. All works in Canada that are created, original works, are protected by copyright. So just because you don't see that copyright symbol doesn't mean that you can escape copyright law. Another myth we've heard is the belief that copyright ends with the death of the author. This is also false. Canadian law extends copyright to 50 years past the date of the death of the author of a work. So keep that in mind when you're using older works. And even then, you may find that newly packaged versions of old works, for example, a new edition of Shakespeare's plays, while Shakespeare's text itself may not be protected by copyright, oftentimes the packaging, the commentary, the annotations surrounding a new edition may be protected by copyright. Another myth we've run into is that posting PDFs in your courses is usually legal. Now, the answer to this one is a little more complicated. Sometimes it's legal, but not always. So you need to assume that you cannot do that unless you obtain explicit permission to post a PDF of an article or other material in your courses. And later on in this presentation, I'll be telling you a little bit more about how you find out what kind of uses, including posting in your courses, are acceptable for a lot of the electronic journals that the University of Regina Library subscribes to. We've also run into people who are quite dismayed at the thought that they will never be able to create course packs again. And that isn't true as well. You can certainly create course packs, but the process has changed a little bit. It used to be that copyright clearance was covered by our Access copyright license. Given that the University of Regina no longer has an Access copyright license, you need to obtain copyright permission for each item you're hoping to include in your course pack. And then you can create a course pack. This may or may not involve an additional cost. Some copyright holders may grant you permission to reproduce their works simply if you give them credit. Others, on the other hand, may want to be compensated financially. The bookstore can provide some support and guidance in creating course packs. So how do you look for copyright information? Books, typically you want to track down the publisher. The author sometimes, but seldom, retains copyright in published books. Usually copyright is transferred to the publisher upon publication. So this seems pretty straightforward. The starting place is typically the publisher website. A few complications that we've run into trying to track down copyright permission for books are that there's been a lot of changes in the publishing industry over the last 10 to 15 years, mergers and takeovers. So you may find that it's a little more difficult to track down that publisher than you thought it would be. Typically, a publishing house is taken over by a new publisher, a larger company, and the rights for their works are transferred along with that sale. This can be a good question for the library reference desk. If you're trying to track down a publisher and figure out who currently owns the rights to their materials, come by the library and we can try to help you follow that trail. The other thing to keep in mind is that publishers will want a considerable amount of information from you before they grant permission. So you will be asked questions like, what course are you seeking permission for? How many students are in that course? Do you want to reproduce the material in print or electronically? Will it be part of a course pack? If it's being posted online, is it in a password protected environment? So these are the kinds of questions that you will want to have answers to before you contact the publisher to obtain copyright permission. Another suggestion we have is that when you're approaching a publisher, you ask them to grant permission to reproduce their material for the life of the course. So you may find that you teach the same course every fall semester. Rather than having to approach that publisher every year, it's advisable to ask them if they will grant you sort of an umbrella permission to reproduce the material each time you teach that course. Sometimes publishers will do this and sometimes they don't, but it's certainly worth asking. And if they do agree to give you permission either for the life of the course or for a single use, keep a record of that permission. And then if anyone ever asks you any questions, you'll be able to pull it out and demonstrate that you have cleared your copyright obligations. The University of Regina Library subscribes to over 40,000 journals electronically. And if we have an electronic subscription to the journal you're interested in, we are making it very easy for you to find the copyright information for those journals. And in just a moment, I'll show you how you would go about doing that. First, though, if the University of Regina does not have a subscription to a journal you are trying to reproduce, or if we only have a print subscription, your next step is to go to the publisher or journal website to see what kinds of conditions they allow. But with our 40,000 journals, there's a pretty good chance that we may have an electronic subscription to the title you're looking for. So on your screen now, you see the Dr. John Archer Library homepage. Over on the right-hand side is a link that says List of e-journals. And if we click on that link, it gives us a screen where we can start typing in the name of the journal we're looking for and click on Find. And a list of journals meeting those criteria will come up. And you'll notice that for each journal, next to the title, there's a link that says View Terms of Use. And if you click on that View Terms of Use journal for the title that you're interested in, you will see information about what constitutes acceptable use of that title under the University of Regina Library subscriptions. So for the example that is on your screen right now, you can see that you can not include this particular item in a electronic course pack, but you can include it in a print course pack. And you also can always link to journal articles from your courses. We'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. The library also subscribes to a number of databases that include other types of content. So we typically think of journal articles as making up the content of databases, but some of the library databases have alternate formats like music recordings, art images, engineering standards, poetry, play scripts, movie scripts. There's a real range of material available. And all of those different databases with those types of content specify their conditions of use, the copyright terms. So if you're wanting information about a source like that, go into the database in question and look for a link that says copyright or permissions or help. The terminology may vary slightly, but usually with a little digging you can find the conditions. If you're having trouble locating that information, you can also contact the library at the email address on your screen, and we'll help you to locate the terms of use for the resource you're particularly interested in. And web sources. We tend to think sometimes mistakenly that if it's on the web, it's free for use and we can reproduce it at our will. And that is not the case according to Canadian copyright law. So again, if you're looking to reproduce information you have found on the web, you want to look and see if you're limited to fair dealing or if other educational uses are permitted. And when I talk about fair dealing, the Canadian Copyright Act allows individuals to reproduce a copy of material for personal research or study or criticism or review. So certainly your students can print off a copy of a particular document or resource online. The issue arises when you, as the instructor, try to print off 30 or 40 copies. That is not compliant with Canadian copyright law. So you need to make sure that the use you are making of the material and the number of copies you're making is acceptable by looking at the terms for that particular website. And if you're not clear or it seems that it's forbidden to do what you want to do, you need to contact the copyright holder and obtain permission for the kind of use you want to make. And again, we really suggest that you do keep a copy of the permissions that you're granted. And also watch for Creative Commons or open access designations, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a few minutes. Here's an example of a website that lays out very clearly what kinds of use you can make of their material, Health Canada. And Health Canada, as you might expect, is very open in the types of use they allow you to make of their material. They're posting their material for public use, and they allow non-commercial reproduction of their material pretty much without restrictions, so long as you give them credit for their content. So this is one example of the kind of information you'd be looking for and would find on most credible websites about their terms of use. There's a little more information. So non-commercial reproduction, again, they're very open as far as what use they allow you to make of their materials. There are more restrictions if you're using commercial use, but in our setting, in an educational environment, it is typically non-commercial reproduction that we're talking about. So library options. The library has a lot of resources available to help you teach your students and get information and material to them in a copyright compliant way. And this includes e-journals, e-books, other electronic resources, and reserve service for print items. As I mentioned earlier, the library has over 40,000 electronic journal titles, and there's different ways you can make use of this content for your students, to distribute to your students. First of all, in some cases, you can in fact post a PDF of a particular article or content in a secure environment like your courses. Again, though, we advise that you assume that is not permitted unless you see explicitly that that use is allowed. And alternatively, you can always provide students with a correctly constructed link to library resources. So if you know what you're doing when you're building a link, you can build links to specific journal articles or other items in library databases, and it really does become seamless access for your students regardless of where they're located, whether they're on campus or halfway around the world. One caution I offer is that you don't want to simply cut and paste from the browser bar. So you pull up the journal article on your screen, and this is where people sometimes go wrong. They copy and paste that address from the browser bar, and unfortunately that is not a stable address that will work for your students. Instead, you need to look for, when you're in the article, look for something called a permanent or a persistent or a stable link. The terminology varies a little bit depending on the journal provider. So you need that piece, that stable link, and you also need to add the library proxy prefix, and you can see that on your screen, that text. What that does is that alerts the journal that this student is a University of Regina student. They'll click on that link, they'll be asked to verify their U of R status, so they log in with their same ID and password they use for their email and UR courses. They click submit and they go right to the material that you want them to read. No charges involved. Building a link like this notifies the system that they have access to this material provided by the University of Regina Library. And there's step-by-step instructions for doing this on the library copyright information page. So if you go to the library homepage, you'll see a link that says library copyright information, and it'll walk you right through creating trouble-free links. You can also visit or contact the library information desk. Staff working at this desk have been trained on how to build these links and are well equipped to provide assistance. Ebooks. The library has over 100,000 titles available in our ebook collection. To use ebooks, much like with electronic journals, you need to provide students with correctly constructed links. Again, you need that library proxy prefix that we talked about in the context of journal articles. And if you go to that library copyright site, you will see step-by-step instructions that will also guide you to make trouble-free links to electronic books. You should, however, be aware that there are a few issues with electronic books. Some of our electronic books restrict the number of concurrent users. So while some of them allow endless users to access simultaneously, others restrict to 1 or 2 users. So what happens in that case is a student goes into the book, student number 2 comes along, wherever they're located, and clicks on the link, and they will get a message that that book is already in use. And you need to think about the implications of that limitations for your particular teaching situation. So if you're teaching a small class, or you're using this for optional readings that students may or may not read, it probably isn't too problematic to have that kind of restriction in place. But if you have a very large class, it can be an issue. You should also note that there are printing and saving limitations within electronic books, and this is because of copyright law. So you can't simply log into an electronic book and print the whole thing, or save or download a copy of the whole electronic book. Once you have printed as much as is permissible by copyright law, you will be prevented from printing any additional content from that book during the session that you're currently engaged in. So you can certainly read the electronic book online in its entirety, but making copies, either print or electronic, you will face some limitations. Again, with ebooks, much like with journal articles, you don't want to cut and paste from the browser bar. That will result in a link that does not work. So look up the book title you're interested in the library catalog, and use the link that you find in the catalog record. And that will include everything you need to provide seamless access to electronic books for your students. And again, assistance on this is available at the Library Information Desk. Other subscription electronic resources available through the library, as I mentioned, include all different kinds of formats of materials. So streaming music, film and theater scripts, music scores, poetry, company profiles, legal cases, technical papers, a great number of resources. And many of these resources also allow you to build direct links to specific items. So for example, for a music course, you can link to hundreds of thousands of individual tracks of recordings. And the same applies for many of the other types of sources listed on the screen. So check the terms of use and have a look in the database. There likely will be some guidance on building those links. And again, contact the Library Information Desk for assistance. So now you know how to build electronic links to journal articles, to ebooks, to other electronic resources. How can you share these links with your students? You can certainly incorporate the links into UR courses. And note I'm emphasizing links here as opposed to the PDFs of documents. As I mentioned, in some cases you can upload PDFs, but linking is always the safe route to go. In addition to your courses, you can also post the links on your website or on your blog or on your wiki. The way the link is built, only registered University of Regina students will have access to that particular content. So it's perfectly acceptable to post the link on a public website. Again, load the PDF in cases where you have obtained or ensured that that is an acceptable use. And finally, if you're not too wild about all this technology, you can also create a course handout with the links listed and give that to your students in paper or email it to them. It does mean that they need to retype the link, but it certainly works. The library also offers a reserve desk service, and this is a service we've offered for many years. You can place print books and journals on reserve in the Dr. John Archer Library, and you can place your personal copies or library copies on reserve. There's a variety of loan periods depending on what kind of use you want your students to make of materials. One caveat is that we ask that you bring your materials to the borrowing desk in the library at least 2 weeks before the semester starts. And we are closed, like the rest of the university, over the New Year holiday. So take that into account when you're planning for your course. And certainly you can bring materials in after that date. It's just there may be a bit of a delay before they're processed and your students have access to them. I also wanted to touch briefly on some other new ways of doing things, and these include Creative Commons, open access, and then finally I wanted to say a few words about advocacy. Some of you may have heard of Creative Commons before, and Creative Commons is described as a some rights reserved type of publishing model. I've heard also people refer to it as restoring some sanity to the publishing industry. So it's a different model. You can see on your screen that Creative Commons is a sort of a non-profit group that has come up with a model that allows you to publish your material online or in print, I suppose, and specify what kinds of use you allow other people to make of your material. So this has implications for you both as an educator. It provides a way for you to use material, know what kind of use is acceptable, to search specifically for Creative Commons materials that are more flexible in the kinds of use they allow you to make. And this also has implications for you as a content creator. If you are creating online resources, educational resources, you may want to consider applying a Creative Commons license to your own work. This has several benefits. It gets greater recognition for your work as more people use it. It also saves you dozens and dozens of requests from others asking permission to use your work if you have clearly laid out the conditions guiding the use they are permitted to make of your work. And Creative Commons has different licenses for different types of situations. So their most basic license is an attribution license, which simply says, I've put this material on the web and you are allowed to use it however you wish as long as you give appropriate attribution. So you credit the author of that material. Other options include an attribution no derivatives license, and that requires that you acknowledge the creator of the content and you don't use that work to create derivatives. So you reproduce it exactly as is rather than modifying it. Additional options include a non-commercial license, which allows use of your material except in commercial settings. So you'll find increasingly educational content on the web is made available with an attribution non-commercial license. So that is other creators saying to you, you're welcome to use my content for nonprofit educational purposes so long as you give me credit. And another condition that can be applied through a Creative Commons license is a share-alike license. And what that means is you're willing to share your material, but you want people who use your material to also share their content or their creations. So it's worthwhile going to the Creative Commons website to learn a little bit more about the different types of Creative Commons license, looking on the web to see what kinds of resources are out there that have Creative Commons licenses applied, and to think about material you're creating that may be eligible or that it would make sense to apply a Creative Commons license to. Flickr is one example of a large popular web resource that uses Creative Commons publishing model. So you can go into Flickr, it's a big photo sharing website, and you can do a search for photos, enter a keyword, and then you can specify, I only want photos that have a Creative Commons license applied. And then that will return results, photos that you can use in the classroom, in your handouts, and so on and so forth. So it's a great tool when you're looking for ways to illustrate or animate, make more interesting your classroom content. And this is just one of many examples of the web resources out there that are adopting a Creative Commons model. Another example is the MIT OpenCourseWare, and this is from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, and they have done an amazing thing in making the vast majority of their course content available free online with a Creative Commons license applied to it. So again, this is useful to you in several ways. If you're looking for resources or tools or ideas to support your teaching, you may want to go and have a look at this site. Some other institutions are doing similar things, albeit on a smaller scale in most cases, but you may find that there are resources here that are very useful for you, may fill the gap for you when you're needing a diagram to show a particular concept, and so on. And so have a look at MIT OpenCourseWare, and also look for other resources online with that Creative Commons license applied. I mean, there's a lot of great material out there, particularly education material, and you can make use of that in your class. Open access is another concept that has emerged in the last 10 years or so. And we've all heard of public domain material. So, you know, Shakespeare's plays, for example, are public domain in that they were created so long ago that there's no longer a copyright stipulation on them. Open access is a little bit different than public domain. Open access is an attempt to create a body of scholarly literature that is more widely accessible to the public, to other researchers, to students, etc. There's been a lot of discussion, particularly in the United States, about problems with the current publishing model, whereby researchers apply for government grants. They obtain those government grants to fund their research. They publish their research results in journals, and then taxpayers have to purchase that content back for use in post-secondary institutions through the form of journal subscriptions. So open access really sort of arose from that kind of a situation, and people thinking that, you know, really publicly funded, in particular publicly funded research, should be more widely available. And you'll see on your screen a link to www.doaj.org, and that is the directory of open access journals. And there's over 5,000 journals listed there that are open access. They're peer-reviewed journals. That's a condition for being included in that directory of open access journals. So they're high-quality journals, and the creators still own the copyright on their material, but you are allowed to reproduce it, to print off copies, to email copies to your student, so long as you're giving attribution. It's a model that allows you to more freely use materials in your classroom, so long as you're giving credit to the owners of that content. So take a look at the directory of open access journals. There's a lot of content on there, and who knows, you may even consider publishing in an open access journal. There are lots of different organizations of people out there who are very interested in access to information, copyright restrictions, and I've listed a few of those on the screen here for you. If you're interested in doing more reading, learning more about this issue, or perhaps getting involved in making change in the way that scholarly information is communicated. So if you have the time, take a look at SPARC, the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. Another link here is the Public Knowledge Project, and finally Create Change Canada. There's some very interesting content on those sites. It's also worthwhile to mention audiovisual materials, so DVDs, videos, etc. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, about what is permissible use of audiovisual materials in the classroom. So I think it's worthwhile to clarify that you need to have PPR, or public performance rights, on videos before they are shown in class. So what is public performance rights? That indicates that you have paid a fee that entitles you not only to view these materials at home or in private with your family, but also gives you permission to show them in the classroom. For us as librarians, this typically takes the format of looking through a catalog and seeing two prices. A price for a video that is for home use, and a second price, which is more, but allows you to view those videos, to show those videos to a classroom type setting. So how do you know if a video has public performance rights associated with it, or how do you get public performance rights? First of all, our first suggestion is that you show videos from the Dr. John Archer Library at the University of Regina. We purchase public performance rights on all of our videos unless otherwise indicated in the catalog. So the vast majority of our videos have public performance rights, and the very few that don't, and the reason they don't is typically that it's a title where public performance rights are not available, will indicate in the catalog. But if you don't see any mention of that in the library catalog, go for it. Show that video to your class. If you have a video, not from the library, but a video that you would like to show to your class, and you don't have public performance rights, you can request permission from the copyright holder. In some cases, that permission is granted free, and in other cases, there may be a cost involved. And again, we suggest that you keep any documentation or correspondence involving permissions with video materials. You can purchase videos with public performance rights, and again, keep proof of that. Or you can also show videos that are covered by the U of R licenses. So the University of Regina recognizes that audiovisual material plays a major role in classroom instruction, and in recognition of that, purchases 2 licenses annually with companies called Criterion and Audiocine. And these are video distribution type companies that represent multiple big motion picture studios. So a link is on your screen there, and you can see more details about these licenses by going to that link. And a little bit more information here. You can see Audiocine covers a lot of the major studios. And it doesn't matter if you have rented a video from a video store or you have purchased a video yourself, you can show that video to your class if it is a studio and a title that is covered by the licenses. So again, if you go to that link you saw on the previous site, there's links to the Audiocine and Criterion sites, and you can do a title search on those various websites for the video that you're hoping to show to see if it is in fact covered by these licenses. I've talked primarily about working in an educational institution as an educator, but a lot of you are also content creators. So a few suggestions for you from that side. If you're creating a website or online resources, consider including a clear copyright statement. That will help people who want to use your content, and ultimately it also helps you by reducing the number of people who are contacting you for permission to use your information. If you lay out for them clearly what they are allowed to do with your content and in what circumstances they can copy it or reproduce it, it will save everyone a lot of time. You may also want to consider applying a Creative Commons license to your work. So go to that Creative Commons website, learn a little more about it, figure out what kinds of uses are acceptable to you of your content that you've created, and apply a Creative Commons license. And then people will know when they find your material what they're allowed to do with it. I also encourage you to think about your published works. So think about agreements before you sign them. Oftentimes when we publish in a journal or we publish a book with a publishing house, we sign a contract or an agreement that specifies who retains copyright privileges or ownership. And oftentimes you are in fact, as the author, signing over the copyright ownership to the publisher, the publishing house, or the journal in question. So think about those agreements before you sign them and make sure you're comfortable with giving up your rights if that's what you're being asked to do. And also keep a copy of those agreements that you have signed so that you can refer to them as needed later on. You may find that you're getting requests from faculty members at other institutions who want to reproduce your content. And permission may not be yours to give. If you have signed over the rights to a publisher, you may in fact need to redirect those requests to the publisher who owns the copyright on the material. And finally, you'll see some links on your screen that direct you to resources that will help you find more information about copyright at the University of Regina. So the first link is to a flow chart that guides you through a decision-making process about what is acceptable use of the content you're trying to use. The second page defines some commonly used terms in copyright and information reproduction. And also at the end of that flowchart, you'll find a contact list of people that you can get in touch with if you have further questions about copyright. The second link is to the U of R copyright information. That's the policies and associated documents for the University of Regina. So do have a look at that and look at it occasionally. Copyright is a sort of a changing or moving landscape, so there will be updates. That material will change, I'm sure of it. And finally, the Dr. John Archer Library copyright information. And as I mentioned, that gives you information about some ways that you can use library resources and still be copyright compliant, gives you some guidance and assistance on building problem-free links, etc. So all of those resources will stand you in good stead as you're trying to be copyright compliant.